Kool-Aid is looking like psychedelic.
We're back with Formula One again. We're back with Formula One again, and today we're going to be discussing an interesting concept that McLaren, introduced into their setup. Is it a good one or a bad one? Vis-a-vis Red Bull's own side of the story. With me to discuss that is Mustafa, Mr. Johnny and Kule. I'm still Afolabi.
All right, so McLaren had anti-dive in the beginning of the season. Everybody said anti-dive is great. It keeps the car flat and stable to provide it to have stability and everything, to be able to deal with corners. But the problem, and Lauren McKees has figured this out, he said the anti-dive is okay because it keeps the car stable. It allows it to apply downforce and everything, and the car won't lunge downwards towards the ground. All good and well, but McKees said that could cause problem with curbs and uneven surfaces if it's not done properly. And the reason it has problems with curbs is the anti-dive works by stopping the car from diving, going down, which means that the suspension geometry is rigid. That's good on a flat track. And they can use the floor to suck them down to the ground rather than using the suspension to bring them up and down. But on curbs, it's not good because on curbs, you have to be the opposite of rigid and you have to be fluid and but you don't want to have too much bounce. So there's a dilemma that McLaren has is if they get rid of the anti-dive, they'll lose downforce on straights or on flat surfaces. And at the same time, they may suffer on the jarring effects of curbs. Red Bull has solved that problem by bringing a floor. See, Red Bull has a flexible front and flexible backs, flexible suspension. But to avoid the issue of bouncing too much on curbs, they use aerodynamic. They use air itself to be part of the undulation you need on suspension, or part of the flexibility you need on suspension. Technical stuff, which I thought I would talk about later. But the idea is that McLaren is struggling on curbs, and they've been struggling on this all season. It's just that we weren't aware of it because the other cars were so slow. We saw in testing in Bahrain that they had too much front grip, which is part of the issue that their change in front suspension geometry and their stiffness brings. It brings them grip, but that grip's not going to help you on uneven surfaces because their grip comes through a rigid setup. But now that Red Bull has solved all its other issues and everything, we see now that on these tracks, like the one coming up in Mexico and tracks like Singapore and some of the latter tracks of the season where curbs and uneven surfaces of track come into play, McLaren is struggling with that. On top of that, they're struggling with the fact that the front geometry that they have, which gives anti-dive, doesn't give feedback to the drivers. It's not supple, which is why you hear Norris for the most part and Piastri for the lesser part complaining that they're not getting enough response from the car. And that's more important on bumpy surfaces and chicanes than it is on flat tracks. If everybody noticed, McLaren won most of their races early in the season on flat tracks, but now we're getting on uneven tracks, which are bumpy and everything. And the only team that solved that issue is Red Bull, whereas McLaren is stuck with this anti-dive, which they should have evolved it by adding upgrades to counteract some of its negative parts, but they shut down their season because we've already won. We just have to sit down and plan how we don't hurt Piastri's feelings when Norris beats him. We want to have a team harmony. Where they go have a team harmony at the end of the year, where Zach Brown is cussing them out because Red Bull kicked their ass, which is what what's his name is going to do. I had too much beer. Verstappen. So the idea is that the anti-dive is good, keeps you stable, gives you downforce, but on perfect ideal tracks, which are flat. But coming up to Mexico, I have a feeling they're going to struggle and they're going to lose big time to Verstappen because Mexico has curbs, and on top of that, it's high altitude. So when it's on high altitude, the curb problem becomes worse because you don't have enough downforce, so you start to float up in the air and drift. They're not going to have enough effective downforce. The type of downforce they use is for flat surfaces. So I'm predicting that they're going to struggle with that, and Verstappen will probably beat them in the qualifying and come out winning this race. I'm not going to say it's going to be a blowout. It's still going to be close, and some of you will be insulting me this week when Norris wins. What are your thoughts on all of this, Mr. Afolabi?
Yeah, so basically, just like you said, it's called high anti-dive because it basically prevents the nose of the car from diving. This can be very important to keep the floor and the aerodynamic platform very reliable and consistent. But it comes at a big cost. The mechanical grip, the trade-off is brutal. The same geometry that locks the car's nose in place under braking also locks the suspension over bumps and curves. And so what happens is that the front suspension is too rigid. The wheels can now begin to move up and down freely, in uneven surfaces. So this destroys the car's mechanical compliance totally. Now, if you look at on a buttery smooth circuit like Barcelona Silverstone, the high anti-dive is a good setup. But when you get to bumpy track, it becomes a nightmare. Now, if you take it to a circuit like with aggressive curbs or bumpy surface like maybe Monaco, Baku, or even where the one that was just completed, suddenly the car cannot ride bumps. Instead of the wheel absorbing the curb, the entire car gets physically lifted and it begins to jolt. So basically, if you look at that, it's a good setup, but it comes at a compromise and a very costly one at that. And if you look at the human element side, drivers like Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri feels that this is very, very punishing and undrivable. That's the rigidity setup. So the car hops and loses the tire crucial contact patch. So it's a big cost that comes to mind. And I feel this is where Red Bull can have an advantage,
Yeah, and see what Red Bull did was they brought in the floor and they changed the suspension. And they also added some things in there so that the suspension itself will be compliant, but not too compliant, because if it's too compliant, then it's going to be going up and down on the curves and it won't have any stability. So what they did was to make up, what they do is that on the straights, it's a little bit rigid, but when they get onto curbs, there's a special type of aerodynamic use of air, which now lets the air do some of the suspension. You get what I'm saying? So the question is, the big mistake that McLaren made was they were ahead of everybody in concepts. They had the anti-dive, but they should have, and we all know that in the real world, everything needs to be a hybrid. They should have focused on figuring out how to keep some of the anti-dive, but bringing upgrades to deal with these bumpy, uneven surfaces. And if you notice, that's why Piastri's suffering now. He doesn't have a flat surface to drive on. He's suffering more than Norris. Norris is, because they gave Norris feedback. They gave him some devices to give him feedback on curbs. And earlier, Piastri said, I don't need it. Well, I think you might have wanted to have it now because you need driver feedback. What do you think, Mr. Johnny? Yeah.
This high anti-drive sounds like a double-edged sword. It cut you and it cut your enemies as well. So you have to see it's hardcore. What I think. Usually McLaren having a Mercedes engine and there's a Mercedes in that McLaren. They usually have coming out of the corners. They usually have a lot of traction and coming out. So as in power, more like power coming out of corners apart from traction. So that might help out McLaren. But apart from that, I think. They're not going to have a good time in Mexico.
And the problem is, like you said, they have traction and power, but traction means nothing when you get on a curb or where the surface is uneven. Because the type of traction if the track is fully flat, then these guys are going to be unbeatable. But yeah, you're right. And this is where they should have been upgrades, because what upgrades do and what engineering is all about is to solve one problem. Then when you solve one problem, it brings another problem. So now you find out a compromise to try to incorporate both solutions, even though they go against each other. They're not perfect. And the difference is that Red Bull is solving problems, but only in Max Verstappen's hands can they still be better, because he's still adding time to the car because of his ability to balance and rotate, and his ability to adapt to curbs or anything else. So Verstappen, he'll downshift. He knows how to manipulate the car the way that Schumacher did, so that if there's any problem based on something, like if there's a problem with anti-dive, he'll figure out a way to go against it by doing some type of mechanical change of the way he drives, and also trying to get time for the team to give solutions to the problem, which is what Red Bull is doing. They don't have the perfect car, but they have a car that's perfect enough that if it's in Verstappen's hands, he might barely win this championship. What do you think, last thoughts, Johnny, before we go to Kool-Aid? Man, we reached grandma for this deal. What are your thoughts, Mr. Johnny?
Yeah, I mean, I like it's like, what's his name, Verstappen's craft in making, his driver skills in really making and adding to whatever upgrades even stuff that they got to their cars. That's actually what's keeping Red Bull actually in the game.
Yeah.
Verstappen.
And Lauren McCrea admitted it. I know Khalid will argue because he believes in teams. Lauren McCrea said that Red Bull actually is a team that's only centered on Verstappen because Verstappen is the one who can adapt. So Verstappen is actually the conceptual framework for McLaren. It's not for Red Bull. Red Bull is not a team that's looking for drivers' championships. They're looking to develop the fastest car driver combination, and that's the combination of Max and Red Bull. It may not be the fastest car, but when you add man and car together as one entity, it's the fastest. And that's how good Verstappen is. It's just like building your team around Michael Jordan. This ain't no fucking team. This is the Michael Jordan show. What are your thoughts, Mr. Kunle?
Yeah, so I think the easiest way to try to simplify McLaren's anti-dry system, if when we were all 8 years old, we used to play with Lego. And if we made the basic toy in Lego, basic Lego car, it's very stiff. Then as you get a bit older and you learn your Lego techniques, you have your little suspensions and you have that independent suspension for each car, which gives the flexibility. So that's the easiest way to understand McLaren. So it's a very stiff car. And this mechanism, this setup uses unique angles, front suspension linked to prevent the car's nose from dipping under heavy braking. So there are going to be some advantages. Funnily enough, there will be some benefits that McLaren will enjoy at the Mexico Grand Prix because it helped to combat low downforce by optimizing the ground effect. McLaren system helps to recover some of this lost performance. Secondly, it can also help improve its cooling efficiency. And thirdly, it can help enhance driver feedback. So there are some gains against the setbacks of the car. So I wouldn't want to write off McLaren completely at Mexico. They can compete, albeit that a slightly compromised because of not so much the problems of McLaren, the strengths of the Red Bull.
Kune, you have just earned your PhD in mechanics and everything. True, brilliant. So here's the thing. So now because their car is super stable and rigid, that helps for tire drag, which is why McLaren always does well in long races for tire drags. But if you notice, they're having problems with passing people because on the corners, like they couldn't pass Piastri, Norris couldn't pass Leclerc because on those corners and everything is bumpy and stuff. So like you said, it's a double, not a double-edged sword, but it's a blessing and a curse. It still gives them the optimal entire drag for a whole lap. But the problem is that on those corners and those curves, they still struggle. So it's a tale of two cities. But the main difference is that Red Bull still has less good tire drag than McLaren, but they've closed the gap. And that's why McLaren was beating teams earlier, because even if they were stiff on the corners, if they were stiff on the curve, the other teams had such bad tire drag that it didn't matter. But would you agree now that Red Bull has figured out his tire drag thing and has less tire drag, it's cut off of some of the advantages of the rigidity of the McLaren. Would you agree, Kunle? Yeah.
I would say so. Early versions of this system were criticized by Norris for reducing steering feel. And McLaren has since developed a modified geometry to provide a more intuitive feedback for him, allowing both drivers in McLaren to better extract the car's performance. So there are some good things there that are working for them. And so I think the suspension also contributes to better thermal management for the McLaren. So there are some bits and pieces that can work for them.
But you see, I think the problem is that McLaren focused more on stability and on cooling and stuff. But remember I said this, McLaren is not really a rocket ship, it's just a stable car. Red Bull is focused more on the raw speed with the frontiness and stuff, but it's less stable and more volatile than McLaren. So what you're seeing now is that McLaren is fast, not because it has a lot of top speed and line speed, but it's fast because it's stable and it controls its tire stuff. But what Red Bull wants is a rocket ship. A rocket ship doesn't need to be stable. It's very pointy, but a lot of rocket ships blow up before it's over. You get my point? But so what I would say, Kunle, is that McLaren is actually a cruiser, a cruise missile. Red Bull is a Mach 1 what do they call it? What do they call it now that goes faster than speed? Hypersonic.
Hypersonic.
It's a hypersonic. And what you call it, McLaren is a cruise missile. McLaren is good if you want to have a 5,000 kilometer attack. Red Bull is good if you only need a 10-kilometer attack. What do you think? Guys, this is groundbreaking. Good work, man. We're on level now. What are your thoughts, Mr. Folabi? Last thought.
Yeah, so basically what I feel is that in Mexico, because there are a lot of sharp curves and uneven surfaces due to the altitude and the expansion of the concrete. Now, the low grip that comes from thin air makes mechanical grip and curb riding more critical. Now, because Red Bull has a more flexible suspension, it will allow them to attack the curbs more aggressively. And with this, they're going to maintain contact and stability. McLaren, however, will lose their flow. I think the front suspension will lock up, and the bouncing the tire off the curve will be a little bit more consistent. Now, this will break their downforce. It will affect their downforce momentarily. Now, in summary, Red Bull's consistent mechanical grip will help them, and their transitions will be smoother. Whereas for McLaren, the aerostable they feel they are getting from the setup will not be as consistent as Red Bull, and they will struggle for traction and the feel for the driver. That's just what I feel. So, in summary, I feel Red Bull will have an advantage in Mexico because of the terrain.
And I think part of the problem is that
and undulating surfaces.
Yeah. So it's a double thing. First of all, Red Bull has more top speed. So on the straights, they're going to dominate. And then any advantage that McLaren could have on corners and on tire deck is going to be exacerbated by the undulation, the unevenness, the curves, and the high altitude, which is going to even make it worse and that's going to affect McLaren. So I think we can soundly say Verstappen's going to win, but you know how F1 is. We don't know.
You never know.
McLaren, because we say so, McLaren might blow everybody up. Okay, last thoughts, Mr. Johnny. Yeah.
Oh, well, I think in Mexico, we're going to see wild man from Piastri. Piastri is going to be wild. I mean, he's going to bring out the beast because he knows that he has to win. Piastri knows that he has to win if he wants to keep his title, if he hold on that title. So we're going to see a wild Piastri.
Yeah, that's the crazy. And I think he's going to double down. Piastri lost focus a little bit, but we know that he's a disciplined person. So he lost focus, and I think he should never have allowed them to give those points back. But I think he's learned his lesson, so he might have enough time to still hold on to this championship. All right, Kunle, what are your last thoughts?
He's under pressure. He's under real pressure.
Yes. I think Piastri is under pressure because even though he has this lead, he does need to overhaul both Piastri and Norris one or two more times and stay in the top three for the rest of the season in order to ensure he wins. Because if Verstappen keeps winning ahead of him, he is actually going to get overtaken. He's not mathematically ahead of him to be relaxed for now. And this track is another track for Red Bull, and he's going to get ever closer. And the points gained from sprints also are going to hurt Piastri. He got no points from sprints, both McLarens. 2 races, was it 2 races ago or this race that they got into trouble?
No, that race, and they lost points in the sprint. 8 points. Each of them lost 8 points to Verstappen in the sprint. Then he lost more points in the finals. And there's still another sprint coming up, so that's more points. That's why Piastri needs to start winning. And for him to win now, it's going to be like David versus Goliath. He's going to have to maximize all the strengths of that car. And also, that's why McLaren needs to choose Piastri as their number one, so that they can also double team and undercut Verstappen, but they don't want to do that. Piastri needs the team's help also. What do you think, Kunle? Yeah.
Even if Piastri cannot stop Verstappen from winning the next 3 or 4 races, he needs to at least be there or thereabouts so that the damage is minimized, so that it can take us deep into the season before it's crunch time. But if it is this consistency of form maintains for McLaren, he will eventually take him down. But then it might just come to one of the last races, maybe in Qatar. That it might come down to a last race to see who's going to be championship of the season. Yeah. But for this,
sorry to cut in front of you.
Top 3.
Yeah, sorry to cut in front of you, but the last race is in Abu Dhabi, which is a flat track with no curbs and low speed, which means it's going to be to McLaren's advantage. So my prediction is that Verstappen is going to cut the lead, and by the time they get there to the Abu Dhabi, that's going to be the decider, like Verstappen versus Hamilton. Which is why I have a feeling that the way this season has played out is scripted by F1 analysts who want it to be exciting. You understand what I'm trying to say?
Abu Dhabi will be the Champions League final.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, this is an entertainment. For all sport is entertainment at the end of the day, and if you don't maintain entertainment, who's going to want to watch you? So it is an exciting end to the competition to see all these teams getting so close to each other at the end. It will be fun to watch.
I tell you what, it ain't gonna be. I don't care about if it's boring as long as Verstappen win. I want Verstappen to win and for it to be boring. I'm just joking. All right, nice one, guys. Beautiful show. Take us out, Kunle.
Okay, so it's been an interesting look at the future happenings in what had not been an exciting Grand Prix next year, but promises to be full of intrigue and promise and excitement this year at the Mexico Grand Prix. And from myself, Johnny, Afolabi, and Mustafa, we bid you goodbye, farewell, adieu. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.
All right, nice one. So, Kunle, we're going to do, if you're free, we can do something at 6:15 on South African politics for today, and that will be it for today. If you're free. What's his name will be with me also, Mr. Saeed. Me, Kunle, and Saeed are the three amigos for Africa and world politics. All right, thanks, guys. Good show.
All right.
All right, no problem.